Hello everyone, this is Kestrel Raptorial. I have a lot to talk about in this video. First, I got my copy of Ben Shapiro's new book, The Right Side of History. Uh, Came last Wednesday night. I was reading it pretty enthusiastically, pretty fast. First several chapters right when I got it. I have had to slow down a little bit. Since then, I was speaking with my younger brother who came to visit yesterday, and we played a little bit of PlayStation 4 together. We haven't done that in almost a year, actually. And we also talked a lot about the state of the world and the threats to the West that are making themselves very much clear. I'll do a whole nother video on that. So, one thing I do want to say about The Right Side of History, Ben Shapiro's book, it's very good. But I think one thing that might make it a little bit hard to access, especially if you're not used to political and historical writings. I'm not particularly, although I'm used to scientific writings, and so that helps a little bit with complexity. It's largely a history book, which makes sense, as Ben Shapiro has himself said that he was a history nut throughout his childhood and adolescence, so it's clearly a passion of his. If you find reading history pieces somewhat difficult, then this book is going to take more effort to get through than something like 12 Rules for Life, which is a self help book, or The Art of the Argument, which is Stefan Molyneux's logic and argument book, philosophy. Uh, this is heavy in what I would describe as history of philosophy and history of freedom. And those are very important. Knowledge about those is very much slipping, as Ben himself talks about in the book. Speaking of the other books I mentioned, I do highly recommend you check out Stefan Molyneux's podcast, Freedom Main Radio. He has, over the past few months, been hosting live web chats about once every week or a couple of weeks, often on Sundays. I've watched a couple with my younger brother. He's halfway through high school. And is taking a construction shop course that is going to be immensely useful in getting employment in his adulthood. He's also very interested in the Army. But after he spends a career in the Army, if he goes through with that, and he's very enthusiastic about that, of course, he can fall back in his older years on construction jobs, build homes, um, and be kind of a handyman for people. That actually sounds like a fairly good life. I am soon going to be starting a 4-month machinist training course that will last until the beginning of August and will also be immensely useful in finding a good paying job to support a family with in the future, provided my plan works out, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. Now what I want to talk about is New Zealand's embarrassing response to its recent Christchurch shooting. That was a couple weeks ago, I think, and like so many idiots who act before they think things through, they moved to implement a gun buyback plan. So this was the first dumb thing. Now, this was already tried in Australia some time ago, and only a third of the guns were returned, so it will and should fail. One of the major book distributors in New Zealand also removed Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life from the shelves after a photograph of him standing next to a guy in a shirt that said, "I'm a proud Islamophobe," and listed a bunch of actually not unjustified reasons to oppose Islam. I myself am rather quite fond of flipping off Islam every opportunity I get. That does not mean that I'm going to go and shoot people who are praying in a mosque. But I will say that the sheer obliviousness to the very escalating into violence problem that has come about with Western governments uh, importing Muslims into countries where the values and the country's structure is incompatible with the structure of Islam, has been extremely irresponsible and stupid, and is, of course, going to bring about conflict. Um, People opposing what the governments are doing and the conservative movement have been saying this is exactly what's going to happen for quite a while. But how often do governments listen? Or they just call us all the horrible names that we've all heard 1,000 times over, 1,000,000 times over, and shut us down, and use their Antifa mobs to do so. The percentage of people who are angry about the state of the world and the position that the governments are putting them in, who go on to act out their anger in murderous ways, is very, very small. The number of white people who do so is actually extremely tiny, far fewer in number than the percentage of Muslims who want Sharia law, which Westerners do not want. Sharia law is the most horrifically abusive to women and children legal system on earth. And despite all of the shit and slander thrown at them by leftist doctrine, it is white Western men for the most part. There are some women speaking out against it, but for the most part, it's white Western men who are trying to defend their women and children from that. Now, in my last video, I talked about the difference between white supremacy and white nationalism. And this is something that I think even the Daily Wire podcasters get wrong. They don't get a huge amount of things wrong, but I think they mistakenly merge these two ideas. So just to go over, white nationalism, at least on its own, and not paired with a doctrine that radicalizes it, is the idea that white people should have a defined and defended country of their own. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think this really resurfaced among some right-wingers upon learning about the land expropriation without compensation, as well as the brutal murderings of white farmers in South Africa. And this really hit home the possibility of one day having to have a secured white nation, and I can see why. White supremacy, on the other hand, is, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. The idea that Caucasian people are the summit of human existence, and this is the ideology that easily leads to something resembling the Nazi regime. And it is an ideology that very, very, very few conservatives agree with, despite being called white supremacists relentlessly. In reality, very few of them, and very few of them are. And very few would ever want things taken that far ever again, by any doctrine, by any people upon another. So are we clear now on what the difference is? I'm going to talk about a kind of obscure analogy. This would work a lot better if it was about 10 years ago, but most of us have read the Harry Potter books. I was 12 years old when the first one came out in 1997. And if you'll remember, in the 5th book, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, when the magical government, the Ministry of Magic, sent Dolores Umbridge to be the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, who teaches the kids nothing. Government school parallel there. One of the restrictions she places on the Hogwarts students is the banning of Luna's father's tabloid magazine, The Quibbler, which published wild stories about cryptids and conspiracies. But during the second rise of the evil overlord, in which mainstream media printed nothing but cover-ups and misinformation, seen another parallel here? The Quibbler switched to revealing truthful accounts of unfolding events, and became one of the most genuine and reliable sources of news and advice among the British wizarding community. When the Ministry, infiltrated by the Dark Lord's minions and their loyal dog Umbitch, banned the Quibbler, Hermione pointed out that doing just that was the guarantee that people would read it in peaceful yet shameless defiance of the government shakedown. So, to everyone in New Zealand, well, and everyone everywhere else around the world as well, who can see their rights being intruded on by the brainless prime ministers, if you can get a copy of 12 Rules for Life, read it. Go for it. Get your hands on all the conservative material you can. Actually, same to all the people with all conservative media. I think I stated that twice, but Imprimis from Hillsdale University in the U.S. That is a great newsletter about political events and the details of both the complexity and the threats they are posing. Defy the growth of government restriction. Not quite the government itself. We're not there yet, but defy the growth of government power and restriction on your freedoms as much as you can. And I think we will see freedom restored one day. It's going to be a long battle. And I'm sorry for what you have to live through right now. It's pure emotional reaction rather than reason. And that, combined with government power and resources, is extremely dangerous, easily destructive. This level of incompetence, banning Jordan Peterson's book in New Zealand because of a photograph, and the gun buybacks as well. We'll talk about that. I think I wrote some. New Zealand would not be overseen, governed this idiotically during the reign of Harpagornis. So in the spirit of the most awesome eagle that ever lived, defy the government restrictions, New Zealanders. In America, the Mueller report, which Democrats and their base were for 2 years pinning all their hopes of impeaching President Trump on, finally released its findings and determined, after very thorough investigations, declared that Trump never colluded with Russia to win the 2016 election, that there would be no more indictments of anyone in the Trump administration, and this dealt a final blow to any last possibility of credibility in the leftist media continuing to run the story. They'll try to anyway, but it's not going to work. And if they continue to try and run any Russia collusion narrative, Trump, with every reason, can point to them and say it's just out of pure maliciousness that they are trying to hold this already falsified deception rather than try to address any of the issues concerning the American people with any realism. Although, I mean, the seriousness with which they're going to be taken has been blown already, so even if I tried. Some of the networks are very timidly admitting they made a mistake. They're still trying to pass off their actions as justified, claiming excuses like that they were reporting the facts as they knew them. This is a blatant lie. They did not know anything. They were guessing. They were worse than guessing. They were outright lying because the investigation was ongoing for over 2 years with no certainty about anything. Rumors, yes, but nothing was sure. That's why Mueller had to go conduct thousands of interviews and depositions. So the media wasn't reporting the facts as they were coming out. That's not how investigations work. You don't get leaked details during the detective work. And the media was clearly, as conservatives were fairly sure of, attempting to ensure Trump's impeachment. That was the motivation. And now that it will not be happening, they are showing their true cowardly colors. Not that their colors were that difficult to see all along, and they want the people to forget their destructive deception. We're not going to. And they'll also try to use an excuse like, well, it's our right to question the president. Yeah, but you didn't question Obama. And you falsified certainty that you just didn't have and didn't even make sense to have during the investigation process. So, yeah, it's over, media. It's over. Now, there was the Jussie Smollett story. So, as far as that goes, a number of people have pointed out what I would have said anyway. He's walking what should be walking the plank, metaphorically. But he is walking free because he has celebrity status and because he is a close friend with the Obamas. And this has pissed off the Chicago police, who did about as good a job as they could have done and had all the evidence that Jussie Smollett paid these two Nigerians who were who were his personal trainers to stage an attack, to go to the media, said it was two white people beating me up because I'm a black gay. The Chicago police investigated it, found out he was undoubtedly lying, and the rule should be that if you falsely accuse someone of a crime, you should get the sentence as punishment they would have gotten had they actually committed the crime. And this would be actually very good deterrent against falsifying crimes, but it's rarely carried out. And of course, for celebrities, a lot of celebrities get off scot-free for crimes that no one should get off for. This man set up a false race crime for attention, and because he knew that the horribly anti-white mainstream media would lap it up without question. And had an investigation not revealed the truth, it is entirely possible that two random white people, probably men, certainly men because he described them as men, but would have been taken from the streets and innocent white people would have gone life in prison just to satisfy a racist need for the identity politics victim narrative, as well as Jussie Smollett's arrogance and thirst for more money. He makes a fairly good living already. I do have to tell you, white people put up with being blamed for the evils of the world for decades. The truth is, wherever white people did build colonies in the past, the standard of living in those parts of the world vastly improved. This doesn't mean that no wrongs were ever committed. Wrongs have been committed throughout history, and by just about every race upon every other, to some extent. But white people have freed the most people in the world than any other race ever has. We have continuously worked to learn from our mistakes, our wrongs. When have the Muslims ever apologized for the Muslim slave trade? It's barely even talked about. Why? Well, it's identity politics again. In the British rule of India, the practice of sati, or the burning of a widow on the pyre of her husband who died, was stopped. This was stopped by British rule of India. In Africa, the population of the natives was multiplied with the bringing of business, of infrastructure and medical technology and farming technology to Africa. Now, how well it's been held up has been different in different countries. Irrigation in South Africa. South Africa was doing very well a little bit earlier than the 90s, but not long ago at all, in the 70s and 80s. And yet, how are the white farmers being treated now? Well, they're being genocided. In the early 19th century, a radical, oh, 20th century, sorry. This did take place in the early 1900s. I'm going to say that does kind of get confusing, but the uh, the number of the century is what it ends with. Sorry, so 1900s to 1999, 2000 is the 20th century. So that's so early 20th century. In the early 20th century, a radical Muslim group that called themselves the Young Turks, which, yes, Cenk Uyghur's network named itself after, they know what it means, genocided the white Armenian Christian population by terribly brutal methods. And the Armenian genocide was one of the primary inspirations that Adolf Hitler, who, by the way, loved the Islamic religion, used to go about and excuse his actions for the Holocaust, that we all learn about and we're all told was horrifically immoral. And yet, for the purposes of political correctness, the Armenian genocide remains largely undiscussed. But one of the reasons, if not the main reason, well, there was radicalizing feedback from the people asking for it, but so there's a number of factors. But the ignoring of the Armenian genocide was one of the reasons that Hitler felt free to conduct the genocide of the 1930s and 40s Holocaust. He said, no one ever talks about the Armenian genocide, so I figured it was, yeah, why not go ahead with it? So he got his inspiration from the Muslims committing their genocide against other groups, against non-believers. And in Western countries, it's gotten to the point where white people can't even talk about an identity of their own, nonviolent as it may be. Yeah, there are some violent groups, but they are tiny in proportion. I can barely even talk about it without being called a racist. So, which I don't know the exact percentage, but I would say 98% of them are not. So white people are sick and tired of being hated. And men, and not just white men, I mean all men, are sick and tired of having their lives destroyed by women falsely accusing them of sexual misconduct or rape, and then no consequences ever, or at least very rarely, falling upon the woman. This sex baiting, this race baiting, it's all got to stop. I think everyone of all races, in fact, is sick and tired of growing up in broken families, which is truly one of the worst things that has ever happened to the West and to other countries as well. My parents, for example, destroyed their family for extremely petty reasons, just shattered it when I was 10 years old, and I have found it extremely difficult to try and piece together a possible strategy for having a stable family in my future. My siblings and I are trying to break that cycle because we've done a bit of research, and it's not just our parents who divorced and busted up the family. This is several generations back. This has been repeating. So if we want to break the cycle, we've got to come up with a strategy. Now, as I said, in 1 week, I'll be starting an industrial machinist training course that will be finished in 4 months. And if I pass, I will be able to get enough of a skill set to be in demand in this job area that really does need more workers. And if I can make a just decent living on that, I might be able to earn enough money to stabilize my life, work on my projects such as realist ecology and the fantasy series I've been working on little by little since I was 13 years old, and maybe find a good woman one day to adopt children with. That might work. I can't have biological children because the illness that destroyed my childhood is genetic and I will not risk passing it on. So 2 years ago I had a vasectomy. It was a necessity in my case. The point is, um, I know that many of us are trying to find our way in life, still hurt badly by terrible choices our parents and our society made, and all the excuses and justifications they're trying to give. And, individually we make them too, but on a country or international scale, they can be exponentially more destructive. So I'm in the boat of trying to figure things out just step by step too. I think I have a strategy. We'll see how it works out. But I am also terrified for the future of the world. So in my next video, I will talk about the conversation that I had with my younger brother yesterday about our fears about the future of the world. Till then, this is Kestrel Raptorial.